Governments are built upon the confidence of the people. The only reason anybody believes this government has power is because they know the government has the power to enforce the law. I was recently reading about the adoption of the U.S. Constitution and the Articles of Confederation and the problems the U.S. government had in being unable to actually enforce the law. All it really came down to was there was no confidence in the system. Donald Trump is fighting tooth and nail in a propaganda war. It's something I called out several weeks ago, actually now, following the election. On the right, Trump supporters are saying that there's rampant fraud. We can see the evidence and it proves the election was stolen. Well, it's true. There's evidence of widespread fraud across the board now. And it appears the FBI is now seeking to investigate. They recently asked Matt Braynard of the Voter Integrity Project to turn over data on illegal ballots cast. Braynard is going to be speaking, I believe, in Arizona at a hearing, a fact-finding hearing on fraud. The evidence certainly exists. Now, I can't tell you what the evidence ultimately brings us to. You're going to need a court. You're going to need people to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. But there's a ton of evidence. And the most I can say is there's strange anomalies. It doesn't prove a conspiracy, but it may prove that, well, the election is broken. And when it comes to Donald Trump's path to victory in the Electoral College, all he need do is convince Republican legislatures to call the election in dispute, maybe send their own slate of electors, which the Constitution recognizes, and then Joe Biden doesn't reach 270. But again, the right is adamant. They know what they're talking about. Over on the left, they're saying there's no evidence. It's all lies. Trump is delusional. CNN puts out a statement in their newsletter saying that Trump is backsliding into a delusion because he's weak. But CNN also lies almost every single story they put out about voter fraud. There is evidence of widespread voter fraud. Matt Braynard collected publicly available data and cross-referenced it several different ways. Change of address requests, for instance. People who are registered as having moved, their address appears in a database saying they don't live in Georgia anymore, but they're recorded as having requested an absentee ballot and voted, which would be an illegal vote. Now, maybe you're saying, well, we don't know it was them. Someone else may have cast the vote. Congratulations. That's also fraud. But the left is completely ignoring all of this. Or I should say the media is. Well, now we have what I would say is tides turning. Rand Paul is not your typical, I wouldn't call him an establishment politician. He's actually one of my favorite politicians, if like one of the only that I actually respect. So when I say favorite politicians, what I should say is I have very little respect for any politicians at all, a small handful. Rand Paul is one of the best because he's clearly a principled guy. Well, guess what? He came out on Twitter and he called out strange anomalies. Now, there are some responses from your traditional liberal types, leftists, who don't seem to understand how significant these anomalies are and how it is staring us in the face that something doesn't make sense. Public opinion is slowly starting to shift, it would seem. In one poll from Rasmussen, they say that around 47% of people believe there was enough fraud to have flipped the election. That's significant. And with Rand Paul coming out and tweeting about this, you are starting to see this narrative now become more and more mainstream. Initially, after the race was called for Joe Biden, this was November 7th, everybody just said, that's it, Joe Biden won. But slowly and surely, we started hearing more from sworn statements, more evidence started emerging. And now that it's been a couple of weeks, we actually have actual evidence. And I can tell you, witness testimony is evidence. We use it in criminal proceedings. People have gone to prison for life on the basis of witness testimony. And I don't think it's perfect. I think you just got to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt to a jury. And sometimes that's the case. And sometimes they are bad lawyers. But listen, witness testimony, evidence. Well, we have hundreds now of sworn statements across the country. In some states that aren't even necessarily in question, like Virginia, we apparently have some sworn affidavits from people saying this weird thing happened. I witnessed this. And much of it is just saying outright fraud. We have statements from people who said they were watching the ballot count, the observers, when they were told to go home because there wouldn't be any more counting. And then as soon as the observers left, they started counting again. How does that make sense? And that happened in Georgia. And that's where one of the issues is coming up with Rand Paul. I believe he's talking about Georgia. He's talking about these big data dumps in major swing states. Maybe not Georgia. But let me read you the story, and then I'll go through what this data actually is And, well, let's push back on some of this leftist narrative. Newsweek says Rand Paul sparks backlash with vote count anomaly tweet. Again, the significance of this is that it's not just Trump saying it. You've now got Senator Rand Paul saying, hey, check this out. It is a large and glaring anomaly. They say the Kentucky senator tweeted about disputed claims of voter fraud, which were made in a lengthy blog post titled Anomalies in Vote Counts and Their Effects on Election 2020. The post questioned why President-elect Biden received vote spikes in the states of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Georgia in the early hours of November 4th, as well as suggesting statistically anomalous cases in other states, and questioned other voting results which had unusually high Biden to Trump ratio. Biden defeated Trump in several key states, with the counting of mail-in and postal ballots massively favoring the Democratic candidate. Trump has frequently complained that the election was rigged as a result of unproven mass voter fraud. I'll tell you what's really shocking. The narrative is changing, man. I'll tell you this. Unproven mass voter fraud. Oh, I thought it was unsubstantiated, baseless, or no evidence. That's right. I saw an article the other day. Now, this is from the Washington Examiner, which is not by any means a leftist publication, but they said Trump offers no new evidence. And I'm like, no new evidence. They're starting to change how they phrase these things. And I'll tell you, Trump supporters are taking notice. Unproven mass voter fraud, because the evidence is overwhelming. The hearing in Pennsylvania, while I said it was silly that they were doing it in a hotel, that's just me. Many people said it was significant because they did it in Gettysburg, and that's why they chose to do it there. But you had prominent people. These were not, random, crackpots screeching about the moon being made of cheese. We had like a PsyOps intelligence agent for the United States intelligence agencies, a retired Navy veteran, saying, this is what we saw, saying there are missing USBs with votes on them. This is not the crackpot conspiracies of an international cabal of, child traffickers or anything. No, this is literally like, I was in the armed forces and I was a poll watcher and the ballots are missing. It's like, okay, we got stuff like that. And we got a lot of it. Here's what Rand Paul said. Interesting. Actually, let me pull up his tweet. He said, interesting. Trump margin of defeat in 4 states occurred in 4 data dumps between 1:34 and 6:31 a.m. Statistical anomaly, fraud. Look at the evidence and decide for yourself. That is, if big tech allows you to read this, anomalies in vote counts. Well, I believe I'm following David Pakman, so he was the default response to this tweet, and he said, "You mean during a 5-hour period? LOL." David. Rand said 4 data dumps. That's it. A single dump of ballots with 100+ thousand votes, in some instances like 150, and 98% for Joe Biden is a massive statistical anomaly. And we have this. This is votepatternanalysis.substack.com. Let me just say a few things first. One of the biggest face slaps is the idea that Joe Biden did better among black voters than Barack Obama did. Or maybe he didn't. I mean, Trump made major gains among the black community. So maybe that's actually like Trump improved his standing among black voters relative, to how well Obama did. Percentage wise, Joe Biden did worse. But Joe Biden, I believe, got more votes from the black community this time around. Now, maybe it's all easily explained by that people are just politics has become pop culture. And people hate Trump. And with mail-in ballots, the Democrats were able to go door to door for a month telling people vote, vote, vote. But I'm sorry, man, even if that's the case, it really is a hurdle to convince people that Joe Biden got more votes than Barack Obama did. Some people even made the joke that, wow, maybe the real reason Barack Obama got elected in the first place was because of Joe Biden, seeing as how many votes he got. I think these are interesting critiques, but I do think they ignore the fact that people were voting against Donald Trump. And that is a very, very serious problem for this country. Let me tell you, depending on which source you read, they say about 40 or so percent of the Democratic Party is progressive. The Democratic Party, I think, is like 36 million people. Most people who vote are independents. And that means you've got like 15 or so million progressives or more. And that makes sense because according to the Hidden Tribes analysis, progressives in this country are about 8% of the population. So let's just put it that. Let's just say 18 million people. I said more like in my previous in my segment yesterday, but I'll put it this way: every Trump voter is not a fan of Joe Biden. I would say there's a small percentage that probably will passively accept Joe Biden and say whatever. But let's say you've got around 80 million people who all hate Joe Biden. That's not good for this country. It's not. You've got the majority of Trump voters and you've got a handful of progressives, and they all hate Joe Biden. There are more people who hate Joe Biden right now than who support him. But I'll tell you this, progressives voted for him because they hate Trump more. That's true. But that just means if Joe Biden ends up, being inaugurated, as the media keeps claiming he won, we're going to have a country led by a man that most people hate. And the regular liberals are going to go back to sleep, stop paying attention, and not care about what he does. And you will have nothing but disdain for this man. It's going to be, look, the dude's going to be Sleepy Joe. He's going to be gone. And we don't know what, I don't know what to say. I don't think it'll be like Trump. It's not going to be good when everyone's like, we hate all these people. Anyway, check this out. I want to show you some of this. This is what Rand Paul is pointing out. And I think they have a graph I can show you. This is the famous image. They say, using publicly available data from the New York Times, here is a visualization of the number of votes by candidate in Michigan from the beginning of election night to 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on November 4th. Everyone is pointing this out. See these leaps? Trump gets a big boost, but Biden gets a small boost. This could be a particularly rural, county with a lot of votes. We see that these boosts for Biden and Trump at the same time. Because when big batches come in from big areas, you will see a boost. Now, in one instance, Biden's boost is tiny. It's hard to even see. And Trump gets a big jump. This is probably a very rural area that makes sense. Then you see in this area, this actually makes sense too. Biden's jump seems to be quite a bit bigger than Donald Trump. Well, maybe not quite a bit, but a bit. That's because mail-in voting favored Democrats 2-1. Which means when you see a jump for Biden in a particularly blue area, Trump still does get 20-30% of the votes. So you will see a jump for Donald Trump, but a big jump for Joe Biden. Then we see this big curve favoring Donald Trump, but then all of a sudden, boop, a jump straight up for Joe Biden with nothing for Donald Trump. Now, it's possible. I'll tell you. I've seen a lot of data that suggests that areas like Detroit are 95% Democrat.
Counting
and so some of these websites just autoplay nonstop. So in Detroit, it might make sense that, Joe Biden got 140,000 votes right in one big dump. The issue, I suppose, is every major metro. I mean, come on, even in Ocasio-Cortez's district, 20% is Republican. To come out and tell me that this city is 95% Democrat, it makes me actually question the past elections. They're like, yeah, but in 2016, Detroit was also 95%. And I'm like, what? Trump said there was fraud in 2016, too. You look at Cook Political Report, Ocasio-Cortez, the progressive, she's not a fan of the Democrats. In her district where she wins, 20% Republican. OK, now they don't generate that many votes, but it's certainly not 95-5 or less. That is anomalous. And then, of course, with that bump, Joe Biden slowly takes the lead and beats out Trump. But you can see in every other area where Joe Biden makes a slight gain, Trump makes a slight gain as well. That's because mail-in voting favored Democrats 2-1, or maybe about 70-30, which means if Joe Biden gets 2 votes, Trump gets 1, you'll see a bump for Trump a little bit. Just to see this nothing here is kind of strange. But again, they're going to claim it's Detroit. I think that's highly suspect because I think there's people in Detroit who support Donald Trump, especially when you consider that Detroit has a large black population. They say all of these people voted for Biden, but Trump made tremendous gains among black voters. That's a fact. And the Democrats are being torn apart over it, that Donald Trump gained more among minority voters than like any Republican since George W. Bush or something to that effect, or I think longer than that, actually. Yet in Detroit, he gains nothing. They say, check this out. Check out Wisconsin. You can't explain that. I'm sorry, you can't. Trump and Biden track very evenly. Biden gets a jump probably from an urban area. Biden gets a jump in an urban area. Trump starts making significant gains across the state. And then all of a sudden, data dump, boom, Biden's in the lead. 95, 90%. That's ridiculous. That's what they say. As this graph shows, Joe Biden overtook President Trump's lead through a small number of vote updates, which broke overwhelmingly for Biden in Michigan in the early hours on the morning of November 4th. The situation in Wisconsin is even more stark. A single update to the vote count brought Biden from trailing by over 100,000 votes into the lead. Here is the comparable graph over the same time range for Wisconsin. Now, they claim, this is another thing they're saying, it's because they had to count mail-in votes after Election Day. That means as soon as midnight hit, they could start counting absentee. And then, of course, they're all for Biden. Womp, not true. Mail-in voting favored Democrats heavily. And I looked at the 538 data. You still had a decent amount of Trump votes from mail-in voting. This doesn't make sense. So I'm sorry, man. If I don't trust what they're selling, I can't, there's a really important, let me show you something. The People's Pundit, Rich Barris, responding to Trump. First, Donald Trump tweeted, quote, Democrats suffered crushing down ballot loss across America. This is true. All state houses won. And in Washington, we did great. So I led this great charge and I'm the only one that lost? No, it doesn't work that way. This was a massive fraud or rigged election. Rich Barris, People's Pundit, says, down ballot results present like a typical incumbent re-election cycle. His party recovers much, but not all of their first incumbent midterm losses, largely fight off upper chamber challenges and wins bellwethers. This is not what happens when this is what happens when a POTUS gets reelected, not defeated. There are 19 bellwether towns. Trump won 18 of them. There are 3 bellwether states. Trump won all 3 of them. So, yeah, a lot of this doesn't seem to add up at all. Of course, Rand Paul is getting ripped to shreds for telling people to read the evidence and decide for themselves because it's a propaganda war. And that's what I was bringing up very early on. If Trump can convince enough people that something doesn't make sense and they can question this, when Trump wins, we will avert widespread chaos, disaster. More importantly, if Trump convinces enough people and the Republican legislatures in their states are getting inundated with calls from people saying, I do not trust this, do not cast votes, Trump wins. Newsweek was talking about it. CNN was talking about it. If we get a disputed election in these 3 states, Trump wins. If Joe Biden does not reach 270 electoral votes, House delegations vote, Trump wins. I am not saying it is likely. I am not saying it is the most probable thing to happen in any capacity. And I honestly just can't imagine a scenario where it does, probably because of my normalcy bias. But I'll tell you, man, if these things weren't being lined up, it feels so weird, I tell you. I talk to my friends and I'm like, everything in my head is saying this is ridiculous. Like it does. It's even if these things are standing out to us, could Trump really convince 3 states? Maybe. Now that you got Rand Paul tweeting about it, it's becoming much more mainstream. It's becoming much more high profile. Rand Paul's got 3 million followers on Twitter. So the narrative keeps moving. And CNN is absolutely desperate to claim otherwise, to say, no. It's all lies. It's all wrong. Nothing to see here, folks. I just showed you this. This may be explained. No. Listen. This chart you're seeing on the screen, where there's a huge jump for Joe Biden that immediately allows him to just narrowly overtake Trump. Explain it. I'm sure you have an explanation. Okay. Well, that explanation isn't beyond a reasonable doubt. Sorry. When you tell me that 98% of the votes came in a batch and it was all for Joe Biden, I say, okay, I want that to be audited. I think that's fair. Smoke alarms going off. People are confused by how these can happen in 3 different states. Are you kidding? Now, they go on to say it's like just not possible. They say measuring the relationship between the candidates' margin and their ratio. They say the difference between the number of votes for Biden and the number of votes for Trump, the margin, the logarithm of the ratio between, the log ratio, blah, blah, blah. In other words, given X for Biden and Y for Trump, either metric will produce a score which is the opposite of what it would produce in the update instead of Y votes, blah, blah, blah. Readers might ask, okay, I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty of this. The point is, if you look at this, and Rand Paul tweeted it out to 3 million people and say, yes, I'd like an answer for this. Why is it that the Democrats on the left are saying, sit down and shut up? We're not going to tell you anything. Sorry, you can explain it. That's fine. But it's still evidence. Statistical anomalies have been used as evidence of voter fraud in the past. Evidence is not definitive proof. The left is trying to play this game where they say there's no definitive proof, but they use the word evidence. They're trying to manipulate you. Widespread evidence. Now they say unproven claims. Yes, because we have evidence and it must be answered for. Look at this. From CNN, complicit. Trump is Trump, but his enablers are helping him to undermine democracy. They're staying silent and Trump is backsliding. And they're calling for punishment for Trump supporters. Chris Evans, Zach Braff will never forget Trump enablers.
Counting ballots for
We have New York Post. AOC and Co.'s loathsome plan to keep a list of pro-Trumpers. Trump's enablers can't escape the consequences of their choices. This, to me, shows the desperation. You see, they can't come out and actually refute the facts. If there is evidence and it is being challenged, and it sounds to me like they're worried if we actually investigate this stuff, guess what? You might find something weird. Maybe you'll find the proof you're looking for. We have evidence. We launch an investigation. The investigation draws its conclusion, presents its findings to the people, and then the people can choose to accept it or not. They're trying to resist that by any means necessary. They're talking about wiping Dominion voting machines. No, they got to be reset. And there's lawsuits to try and block it. They're talking about Trump supporters needing to just give up, submit. It's time to concede. And when that didn't work, they said, then you will face consequences for not backing down. I won't. And guess what? More and more people are starting to stand up. Let me tell you something. I have lefty friends. My lefty friends are now asking me, like, Biden really got more votes than Obama? And I'm like, yeah, I'm not saying it's everybody, and I'm not pretending like 3 people is 3 million. I'm just saying some of my progressive friends are like, I get a message, and they're like, hey, did Joe Biden really get like 12 million more votes than Obama did? And I'm like, that's what they're saying. And they're like, oh, that's crazy. Nobody believes it. Okay, I'm sure the traditional like corporate Dem types want to believe it. I wonder if progressives actually want to believe it. I think it's absolutely insane. That it's nuts. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm just saying, think about how crazy that is. That Joe Biden, who wasn't campaigning, who was calling lids every day to the shock and chagrin of reporters, got more votes than celebrity Barack Obama did in 2008 when even I voted for the guy. I voted for Trump this time. I'll tell you this. I have voted twice for the president in my life. For Barack Obama the first time, and he won. And for Donald Trump this time, and it is yet to be determined. But how strange is it? Going back to what the People's Pundit said, everything was tracking for an incumbent re-election, and then you have these weird anomalies, and Joe Biden wins. I'll wrap this up by saying 3 things. First, the important takeaway. It seems like public opinion is starting to shift on this. The other thing is we need answers as to what these anomalies were. Otherwise, I think public opinion will keep shifting and people are just going to be confused. But to answer the progressives' claim that Trump is accepting the results of only the elections where he won and not where he lost, the Republicans and conservatives are talking about many ballots that were undervotes, meaning they only voted for Biden and nobody else. So yes, if you have a bunch of ballots that are for Trump and then the Republicans win, and then a bunch of ballots only for Joe Biden, that's the anomaly. Congratulations, you've discovered it. But I'll leave it there. I do have one more point to make, and that is you may have noticed that I'm not wearing my button up. And, it's because it's covered in gunshot residue. Yeah, I was out at the range shooting quite a bit, like lots and lots of bullets. A bunch of friends, we all went down and we had a good time last night. So now I have to wash the shirt to get all the, the lead and particulates and whatever off of it. So there you go. I'll be wearing it in the next segment. I just wanted to say that it's like I'm bragging. It was really fun, but I'll leave it there. We'll see how things start to progress. I think it's good news for Trump. Next segment will be coming up at 1 p.m. on this channel. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all then.